Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Football Experience brought to you by On the Pod with me, Caleb. First time I've said my name, finally. And Nev's back with us tonight. So, Nev, how you going?
Yeah, good. Thanks, mate. You?
Yeah, pretty good, man. So we had a weekend off domestic football, but the football never stops because we had international games. And I guess the big story that we really need to start on is Italy, reigning European champions, will not be joining us in Qatar for the 2022 World Cup. Uh, where do you start with Italy? Getting knocked out by North Macedonia. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll be honest. I didn't watch the game because I
Yeah,
was. I think I watched Portugal, Turkey, and then after that I watched the Wales game. But what I saw from like the stats and everything, it was remember those old days of playing FIFA and you'd have like 20 or 30 shots on goal and it just would not go in
yeah.
the back of the net. I think they dominated possession. They had like 60 or 70% possession. They had like 30. I think it was 30 or 34 shots on target. And North Macedonia they only had like four shots. Yeah, they only had like four shots and like two on target and one goal. So from a statistical standpoint, and look, like I'll you can always say like they most like if you watch the game, like they most likely dominated as well. It's in one sense it's a robbery. It's a robbery. But yeah, it's disappointing. Like that's Chiellini's and Bonucci's last chance to play at a World Cup. They missed out 4 years ago in Russia,
Yeah.
and now they're missing out again. So, but on the same hand, the way that the draw was made, they would have had to go up against Portugal now. So you would have had either Ronaldo missing out on his last World Cup or Chiellini and Bonucci. So
Yeah.
either way, it would have
You've
been disappointing for those greats of the modern game.
Yeah, you absolutely hit the nail on the head. That's why at this stage, before the Portugal play later, I don't really care that Italy were knocked out. Would have been good to see Italy versus Portugal in the next stage of qualification, but for me, as long as Portugal get through, then that's all that matters. Because, like you said, when the ties were made, we knew we could only get one of Italy or Portugal. So as long as we still get one of them, at least heaven forbid North Macedonia get in. That'd be terrible. Imagine if Italy and Portugal miss out or go into the World Cup at the expense of North Macedonia.
Oh,
And
look,
like
yeah,
kudos to North Macedonia.
with all due respect to North Macedonia, yeah.
Exactly. With all due respect, we love the story while it happens, but then you come to the realization, wait, I don't get to see Italy at the World Cup. I don't get to see Italy play Portugal. So that's why at the moment, as long as Portugal get through, that's all that matters now. And I'll be rooting hard for Portugal in that one, who came through their tie with Turkey on the weekend. I think from the Italian perspective as well, it's you use the word robbery, and I think you've got to the football gods somewhat did rob you in that game, but I mean, going forward, surely we can look at the system where you get you get just a one-off game like this. Surely it should be two legs. We should have more margin for error for these bigger countries because they're the ones ultimately we want to be seeing in the World Cup. But look, great for North Macedonia. They're through to play against Portugal later, and we'll see how that goes. I've got my fingers crossed for Portugal, obviously.
Yeah.
Do you have any? Yeah, go on.
Well, just
Sorry.
touching on that, like I think for the last World Cup, like I know they changed the way that European qualifiers are done because for the last World Cup, you would have two legs, so you'd have a home and away leg against one team, and you'd have one tie, and if you win that one tie, you go through. So I think if I might be wrong on this, but I think it was changed because they made more groups, which allowed for more automatic spots if you finish first. So that made them have to change the ties so that you had like a semi-final tie and then a final tie. in order to qualify. So it's from my perspective, not having two legs to qualify for such an important tournament that only happens every 4 years. I reckon that, yeah, I'm not sure if it's UEFA or if it's a different organization because it's run by FIFA. But I reckon they dropped the ball on this one. Like especially considering like that you were going to lose out on either Portugal or Italy.
Yeah.
However, Italy's group, I think Switzerland qualified ahead of them, and from memory, I think Jorginho had he had a penalty in each of the Switzerland games that he missed.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
They at the end of the day, they only really have themselves to blame, not necessarily the qualification system.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, Switzerland are a good team, but if you're champions of Europe and you've got real hopes of going on and doing something good in this 2022 World Cup, you've got to be finishing top of your group really when Switzerland's your competition. Taking nothing away from Switzerland, I really like what they've done over the past probably decade or so. They've been a really solid international team, but if you're Italy, you're champions of Europe, you're really got to be looking at that and thinking, we got to finish top of that group, surely. We can't put ourselves in the situation where it's a one-off game and this can happen to us, and it did happen to us. So you touched upon it. Oh, sorry, before we go on, did you said you watched the Wales game?
Yeah, like that was definitely an enticing game.
What do you think of
Bale?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. What did you think of the Bale being able to put in this performance with Wales, especially after the criticism he got in the Spanish press from one journalist in particular, calling him a parasite?
Yeah.
At Real Madrid, and that disinterested figure you always see on the bench at the Bernabeu, and lots of reports of him not training. Obviously, the whole golf thing. So is it annoying that he can do this for Wales and not want to show it every week for his club side?
I'm not entirely sure how much it comes to player motivation versus the coach's belief, because there was a point in time when I think it was Ancelotti when he was first at Real. I think he was playing Bale every week. You had that front line of Bale, Benzema, Ronaldo. They were playing every week. And then when Zidane took over, then again he was being utilized quite often when he wasn't injured. And I think there was two finals, two Champions League finals that he was actually the guy. He scored the goals, either the equalizing goals or the winning goals. It wasn't Ronaldo, it was Bale that, pardon the pun, bailed them out. So and that Copa del Rey final, I think it was the final against Barca where he went on that run.
Yeah, unbelievable.
So he did deliver, and then at one point either he lost the motivation or the coach lost belief in him. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 80-20, who knows in what direction, but he always seems to give his all for his country, which I guess as people might know, I'm from Croatia, and the unity when the country comes together, it's amazing to see. It's almost as if the players give more for their country than what they do for their clubs. They find that extra 5 or 10% to give more for their country. And you have some countries that fall into that same sort of mentality as well, and all players that fall into that same mentality. And I guess Bale's one of those players where he steps up that extra 5 or 10% to deliver when he's most needed for his country.
Yeah, and you touched on it as well. He did that for his club for years, especially after that huge transfer fee move to Real Madrid when he first got there. And I mean, the criticism in the press in Spain, I thought was pretty unfair, to be fair, because this guy, like you said, was absolutely key in Real Madrid, winning that first one in 13-14 under Ancelotti. I think he scored the go-ahead goal in extra time against Atletico, and then again in 17, that a goal that's really not talked about. I mean, you should put this goal up on the Zidane 0-2 level against Leverkusen. I think that bicycle to put them 2-1 ahead against Liverpool in that final. I thought that goal never gets talked about, really, and that's just because I don't think the Real Madrid supporters ever really took to Gareth Bale, and that's where your conundrum about what is it, motivation or is it confidence? I mean, you could maybe look at it that his confidence was knocked, and then he's never been the same player in Spain, in a place where you've got to say as well he hasn't really attempted hard enough to fit in as well. I don't know if he speaks the language. I know there's a lot of stories about him in the dressing room not really talking to anyone because he hasn't really integrated. And obviously it's too far gone now. I don't think he really cares about it. So I think I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he got Wales to the World Cup if that was his last action in football, that World Cup tournament, if he got him all the way there. Because you looked at him at Tottenham as well, and you thought that was a place where he should have been loved, and he never really did it on that loan spell either. So
I think he was
maybe
injured for most of it though. So
he was injured when he first got there, but then he started being in and out of the team a bit. But he never really pushed on with it and started performing well in that Tottenham shirt. So it's I really think that what else has he got to accomplish in the club game anyway? I mean, you've played for Real Madrid, you've commanded €100 million or £100 million, it might have been transfer fee. You've been one of the best players in the world for a span of 4 or 5 years. So I think maybe this is just his last hurdle to get Wales to the World Cup. And I would not be surprised at all if that was his last action, if he was able to do that.
Yeah.
So obviously, go on. Sorry.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, he's in the club game, he's achieved everything that you can achieve. Like, he's won the Champions League, he's won the Super Cup, he's won the Club World Cup, he's won La Liga, he's won Copa del Rey, he's won everything that, like, domestic and club, international club, I guess you can call it, title that you can win. So he's achieved everything at a club level that you can hope to possibly ever achieve in your career. So maybe the motivation has dropped, or maybe it's like I said earlier, maybe it's a combination of things. And I guess injuries do also play a part, because he has had his issues with injuries as well, which can play on the mental quite a bit.
Yeah, of course. And when you have those problems with injury, when you're a fast twitch player like he is, we talked about it, that Copa del Rey goal, just sprinting past his opponent at halfway and having to take the long route and still being able to do it. That's what made him so exciting to watch, that direct play, that ability to run through the hearts of defences at such speed with the ball and then unleash such a venomous strike at the end of it, still while moving at speed. When I guess we saw it with Thierry Henry later in his career, when that speed isn't there anymore, the decline can be a bit quicker for those types of players. Michael Owens, another one who springs to mind. That speed goes, and it's hard for those types of players to have the same impact. But we know, we theorise that he has a real passion to be at this coming World Cup with Wales. You talked about it early on, that we were upset that we're not going to see Italy in such an important tournament. My question to you is, are you excited for this coming World Cup? And do you think the World Cup still holds the same importance going into this 2022 Qatar World Cup?
Well, for me, that's a weird one to answer, because I'm not sure if it's a combination of me, like myself getting older, and like I don't look at the players in the same way that I used to when I was younger. Like, you know, I used to look at them as role models and heroes. Now I just look at them as, you know, the majority of players are now younger than us, so they can't exactly be role models for us. So, and I'll use the analogy of, like, remember how exciting Christmas used to be when we were kids? Now it's just another day.
It is.
So maybe as the tournament rolls closer, I'll start to get a little bit more excited. But at the same time, yeah, like the whole thing, like I think it's a very messy World Cup. Like it might be a little bit tarnished in the way that it's. I think I'll use the word speculated in how they got it. In regards to like backroom dealings and all that stuff. Because since we do, it's quite obvious that FIFA isn't the most clean organization. So perhaps maybe that's also playing on people's minds, and I don't necessarily want to drag this into like a sort of whole political or political correctness podcast, but even like the whole thing about workers losing their lives and being mistreated in building the stadiums, like that's obviously there's a lot of negative news and stories surrounding the World Cup, which it's not. I don't think you heard it with Russia. It's 4 years ago. You didn't hear it in Brazil necessarily. You didn't hear it, with Germany in 2006 or even in South Africa in 2010. Like you didn't hear those stories. Now, was that because social media every year just keeps on exploding more and more, and people like are more active on it and speak up about issues more, or is that just because this actually is a dirty World Cup? Like, so I don't know. Like, and also I guess it's moving away from tradition as well. Like it was always, in that June July period, and now it's going to break it's going to break up the domestic tournaments now, like or domestic leagues. So that's also something, like it's breaking away from tradition, and the reason's obvious. Like middle of summer in the Middle East is you're getting. I remember like stepping off the plane at 6 a.m. In Qatar and like Dubai, and it was like stepping into a sauna, like at 6 a.m. in the morning. So I understand for those reasons why they are playing in winter, but yeah, it's not. Maybe closer to the day I'll be more excited about it.
Yeah,
So I don't know what your thoughts are.
It's interesting that you bring up so much of the, I guess we call them political implications. Obviously, from what we've heard, this World Cup's been a real hassle to really get ready for, given the heat, and then obviously them bringing in effectively slaves to build the stadiums. I don't think any sporting event should be doing that, obviously. But hey, here we are. It's 2022, and it's going to go ahead. I haven't heard anything about them being behind or anything, but I haven't really been following or anything. But it looks like we're gonna have. It's too late now to call it off. I know at the time a lot of people wanted it to be changed, that decision to be reversed. But hey, here we are. Some of those stadiums look pretty fantastic. Obviously, I don't agree with the way that they were put up, but we're going to have this World Cup in Qatar, and I'm probably focusing more on the aspect of where it clashes with obviously the big European domestic seasons. We now have a November into December World Cup, which I actually think could be really interesting. I don't know if it'll be good or bad at this stage, but it'll definitely be interesting. I've seen and I've read that in terms of the Premier League, I think they're going to give them their start date and end date seems the same. Seems like they're going to start in August and finish in May. They're going to stop, I believe, at the start of November or in the middle of November, I think. But it's about a week and a half before the tournament starts. So now players, instead of having a month or 3 weeks or whatever it is with the national team, they'll have 9 days, 7 days to get ready, which honestly, in this day and age, I don't think really matters, especially for national team football. These guys are all established. That's why they're playing in a World Cup. So it's pretty much a case for the manager just to give them the instructions. The the only issue I could see with it is you don't get that time for team bonding that you would normally get. But in terms of the quality of football, I think we could even see maybe better football than we'd see in a normal World Cup, because obviously around November time we've been playing for three or so months, 2.5 months in the domestic seasons. Really, we're looking to gear up and be hitting our stride if those top players in the league. So maybe when they get to the World Cup, they're still fresh enough to go and give and put on a great show. But obviously they're not too fatigued from the season that they've just had, especially in England, where you don't even get that winter break. And obviously that's been well lamented. But I know that those two factors in particular have had a lot of impact on people's perception and excitement for this World Cup. But the more that I look at it, the more I think that aspect of it when it starts will be really interesting. And at the end of the day, this is a World Cup. Okay, this is the be all and end all. Really, in football, this is where legends are made. The FIFA World Cup is still the pinnacle of the sport, and that sort of led me to get to thinking about the breakout players that we've had over the years, post World War World Cups. And so I'm just going to go through them because I spent hours on Wiki today look at this stuff up. But if we go for post World War World Cups in 1954, I think we had a so. Well, first I'll say what I mean by breakout performance is these players announce themselves on an all-time stage in these tournaments. They said it was really them. Of examples that I'll touch on, but for the most part, this was players knocking on the door of that VIP room where they go and sit with all the other top all-time greats. So if we start in 1954, we have Ferenc Puskás, who came through, won the Golden Ball for that World Cup, was still playing in Hungary at the time, won the Gold Ball, team finished runners-up, and as always, the Germans, the West Germans as they were back then, but they seem to find a way to beat these all-time great players when they just don't really have a great team themselves. So that was an example of them doing that to Puskás. And then a couple of years later, he gets his move to Real Madrid, wins all those La Liga titles, 3 European Cups with them, and just cements himself as an all-time great. Then, 1958, 17-year-old, and this is one of the examples of a player who not only knocked on the door, but he opened it and just walked in the room, and he almost sat on the throne at this stage because Pelé in 1958, 17 years old, scores 6 goals all in the knockout stage of that tournament. I believe he scored the winner against Wales in the round of or the quarterfinal, and then a hat trick in the semi, and then might have been a hat trick in the final. In fact, I have to fact check that one, but obviously the picture of that is the flick over the Swedish defender's head and then the volley. That's an enduring image, and that started a dynasty for that Brazil team. He was so crucial to it, of 3 World Cups in 4. And like I said, at 17 years old, he didn't just knock on the door. He opened it and walked right through, and pretty much cemented that his name will always be spoken about when you talk about all-time great footballers. And that was just from that World Cup. Obviously, he did a lot in the game. And then 1966, we have, for mine, without putting it down on paper, but the greatest of all time, Franz Beckenbauer comes through, 20 years old, plays that. So I think he was playing midfield at the 1966 World Cup when he was still getting up and down the pitch. Just such a good technical player. I remember, I think there was 1 goal from that World Cup. He might even play 2-1-2s and gets into the box and finishes. And you could just tell from that clip that he was such an elegant player. especially bringing the ball forward from those deeper positions, as obviously he becomes well known for when he moves back into that sweeper position later in his career. Gets with Germany, probably the key player for Germany, gets them all the way to the final, where another all-time great sort of cements his place in Bobby Charlton, leading that English team. Well, Jeff Hurst with the famous hat-trick, obviously, in the final, but Bobby Charlton was England's player of the tournament. And then it obviously later went on and won a European Cup with Man United, but he was a bit older. He was approaching 30. Franz was only 20, and that was a real breakout. And it started along with my 1970 player, the breakout player for the 1970s, Gerd Muller. He started with those two. They started a run of unprecedented success for Bayern Munich, a three-peat in the European Cup, which had only been done by Johan Cruyff before. Added a Euros to that in fact, already won the Euros in 1972 and then a World Cup in 1974. So a great run of success for those guys. I think they made the European Championship finals in 76 as well. So between those two, and Gerd Muller in 1970, 24, so it was a little bit of a late bloomer, but came into that 1970 team, actually won the Ballon d'Or for that season, and scored 10 goals in that World Cup, which is only behind Just Fontaine in 1958 World Cup. Really announced himself on the stage in that, obviously, along with his running mate, whichever way you want to look at it, probably Franz and Gerd. But they went on and did sensational things for Bayern Munich and German football, and obviously Gerd Muller he's sort of the Wilt Chamberlain of football. He is the record book. If you want a goal scoring record before probably Messi or Ronaldo came around, you looked at Gerd Muller. So if you ever break a Gerd Muller record, you know you've really made it. 1978, 74. We didn't really have one at 74. I think that was a clash more of the older guard. 74, you can't say that Cruyff had a breakout because he'd already three-peated for Ajax in the European Cup. So, yeah, he was already established, but obviously that's his finest international moment, being the integral part of getting that Dutch team all the way to the final. This one, you can't really say the Germans didn't have a good team to knock off the player at the time, because obviously they had Gerd Muller and Franz Beckenbauer and a few other greats in that team all playing together. So this was truly a great German team, which Cruyff had the unfortunate bad luck of running into in that final in 74 and on German soil, so that never helps. But yeah, that was more the old guard World Cup in 74. But then 78, and this one might go a little bit under the radar, but Paolo Rossi. And this one was a true breakout onto any sort of all-time or knocking on the all-time door, because he actually scored his first international goals at that World Cup for Italy. I think he scored 3 in that tournament and helped Italy get to, I think, either a third or a fourth place finish in that World Cup. And then from that moment, he opened the door because he won 2 Serie A titles in the next 3 years, a European Cup in 85, and in between all of that, the culmination of the World Cup in 1982, where he, I believe, won the Golden Ball. And there's one game that sticks in my mind where in the 1982 World Cup, they were still having... So instead of doing the knockout stage after the group stage, they did another group stage to get the finalists in the third place playoff. And Italy were in Brazil's group, and I believe it was the last game of the group, Italy versus Brazil, to see who got into the final. Paolo Rossi hat-trick against what was a really good Brazil side with Zico and Socrates in the midfield, who couldn't get to that final because of Paolo Rossi and his hat-trick. And they went on and won it all in 1982 in Spain, and he cemented his place as one of the all-time greats, won the Ballon d'Or that season as well. 1986, it's hard to say. that this is a breakout because he was 25 and he's now, in many people's eyes, the greatest footballer of all time. But you think 1986 World Cup, you think Diego Maradona. And truly, this, for me, this was actually his breakout. I know he had his move to Spain in 82, won a few titles over in Barcelona, but never won a European Cup. And then 86 goes to the World Cup. The famous performance against England in the quarterfinals, maybe the greatest performance by a footballer ever. I wouldn't even say maybe. It was that goal and then just the drama of the hand of God. I mean, I don't think that'll ever be topped. And then finishing the job and going on and winning the whole thing. And that really started a 4 or 5 year run where Maradona was, his peak maybe eclipsed any peak of any footballer of all time, winning 2 Serie A titles with Napoli and a stacked Serie A. I mean, this was the time where Milan were winning back-to-back European Cups and had the amazing Dutch influence on their team, but with the solid defence of their Italians at the back, Paolo Maldini coming through, Franco Baresi, and then Marco van Basten up front, Rudi Hillet. So to win two Serie A titles with that kind of opposition is no mean feat. A UEFA Cup in there as well. And that night, it all started from that 1986 World Cup, which is one game for a single game performance, unbelievable, and the start of the phenomenon that was Diego Maradona, really, for me, in terms of all-time greatness. And then 90, we didn't really have one. That was an unspectacular German side going on and winning it. Side note, Franz Bakker was the manager of that German team, which adds percentage points to your GOAT case if you want to make it to manage your team to a World Cup as well. Is pretty incredible. And then 94, this one, another one that's probably flown under the radar because this was maybe his only real achievement of note. But Romario in that World Cup won the Golden Ball, won the Ballon d'Or for that year. And really, he might not be that high on your list of all-time great, even Brazilians, but to do all that in one season and to come out in that World Cup, even though he was at a late age at 28, that was really where he said, okay, I'm the best player, at least for this World Cup. I've been scoring goals for fun in Holland. I've been scoring goals for fun at Barcelona, but this is where I'm at my best, and this is where I cement my place and walk in. Maybe I'm standing in the shadows of that VIP room, but I'm not really sitting at a table, but I'm still there. I'm still in the presence. And then 98, I had to give joint for 98 because in France that year you have Ronaldo, who won the Golden Ball, but unfortunately suffered that injury just before the final. I believe it was injury, it might have been sickness, but he couldn't give it 100% in that final. But the guy who did give it 100% in that final was Zinedine Zidane, who, again, this is the second one along with Pele, who didn't just announce that they were in that room. They didn't just knock on the door, but they walked into that. They took a seat at the table. Obviously, he'd already had a few Champions League runner-ups with Juve leading into that, but that was his crowning achievement at probably the start of what was a good run for him, picking up another Champions League, and then obviously the old guy and the Euros, and then the old guy sort of performance at the 06 World Cup one last time, which was very disappointing that he couldn't finish the job there because he was spectacular for a mid-30s player in that World Cup, in what was the most fun World Cup I've ever watched in my time watching World Cups. And then finally I have in 02 we didn't really have one. Ronaldo cemented his place then because he'd already
as well. Like that goal.
Sorry?
Ronaldinho.
A little bit. Ronaldinho's a good shout in 02. Yeah, no, I'll actually give you that one. That's one I missed. Yeah. Ronaldinho in 02, obviously, the image of him in that 40-yard goal over Seaman.
But not just that.
That England performance.
Yeah, the England performance in general, because I think he assisted.
Yeah,
Like he went on that mazy
he
run
did.
through
He
the
assisted
midfield,
the.
and yeah,
Yeah, that step over in midfield and then the perfectly weighted pass to Rivaldo,
yeah.
who just slotted it with the left foot. A really great performance by Ronaldinho. So I'm glad you picked up on that one that I missed in 02
Oh,
for Ronaldinho, because that was his coming out.
And what about Bakker? I think he had an outstanding World Cup as well, and he was, I think he was in his early 20s.
Balak's not entering the room with the guys that we've just talked about.
True, but
he's maybe standing outside in the line, probably at the back of the line, to be fair. But no, there's definitely, in all these World Cups you can point to other great players who had a breakout tournament. But I'm talking about elite, the top, the guys who have won the most important things, and they've won Ballon d'Ors and they have records and they're revered. These guys are top of the top. But the Ronaldinho one is 100% one that I missed, so I'm glad you picked up on that one. And then 06, and I mean, they didn't. Well, Portugal did something they did that tour, but Messi at 19 and Ronaldo at 21, somewhat announced themselves. Ronaldo definitely announced, but I guess you could say Ronaldo announced himself in the 04 Euros on home soil as well, but they still couldn't finish that job in there. But in terms of what they've done, they're on. We don't really need to litigate that. But those two guys probably in 06 announced themselves. Probably just a side note on 2010 for Spain. All of those players I could have, well, not all of them, but in particular a David Villa, I could have said that was this guy's, but they'd already won the Euros in 08, so they'd already had a coming out party then, and they were already announced. So a player like that, and obviously Iniesta for Barcelona, Xavi for Barcelona. So I can't really pick anyone because it was the same team that had won the 08 Euros. And since then, we really haven't. Since then, we've had one in the last World Cup, and this brings me to my question for you. I know I've just rambled on for 10 minutes or whatever it is, but in 2018, obviously Kylian Mbappe was the guy who came in, and I think he's still knocking on the door. He didn't quite walk into the room, even though his team won it, because I think Griezmann was still the key player of that France team in 2018. But he put one foot in the door, and so that's my question to you: is when we talk about all the greats that we just talked about who have these breakouts in World Cups, what kind of career do you see, and who can you sort of compare his career to when it's all said and done at the moment for Kylian Mbappe?
But just before I do answer that, I do want to give a shout out to James Rodriguez in the 2014 World Cup. I think he contributed 5 goals and like 2 or 3 assists, and I think it secured was it 80 million? I think it's coming to mind. 80 million euro move to Real Madrid, I think. Even though Colombia didn't go on to, I think they got knocked out in the quarters. But that was a breakout performance for him, which obviously secured him a very large move to Real Madrid. So that one is definitely worth a shout as well in recent times.
And I definitely would have said James Rodriguez if he was a key part of that Real Madrid side that went on and three-peated in the Champions League.
Yeah.
If he had been a bit more of a mainstay in that team, then absolutely no doubt that 2014 World Cup was his breakout, because he was sensational at that World Cup.
Yeah, he didn't. He obviously, I think he had quite a bit of competition, because I think Isco was his main competition in that attacking
Isco,
midfield
I think Asensio came towards the end of that run as well. So
even Di Maria as well. Like Di Maria, he was competing with in that team.
I think that might have only been for 1 year, because Di Maria made that Manchester United, didn't he?
But I think it was that year when Hummers first came, so that was like the most important year for him to cement his spot, I suppose. But yeah, like, so you're basically asking like, who can Mbappe go on to emulate?
Well, if you see a clear comparison to a career here, how far do you think he could go? Because I think I mean, obviously, it's been 4 years since that coming out somewhat, and so obviously, I think a Diego Maradona type career is off the cards because he hasn't been playing in the toughest competition and he hasn't won a Champions League. Probably same for a Paolo Rossi type career because they did similar things. Maradona obviously to a higher level. Yeah, and same for a Cruyff because Cruyff had the slimmer peak, but maybe a Gerd Muller, that longevity. I don't know. So, or maybe you just see him having a totally different type of career from this point out.
I like if I need to compare him to like one of those, if I can compare him to like anyone who I reckon he might go on to like emulate, and in terms of his style of play as well and who he most reminds me of, when I first saw him, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago. Like I think it was back, no, even longer than that. I think when it was back at Monaco, he reminded me the way he ran, the way he dribbled, the way he shot. He reminded me of Thierry Henry. So that's who I think. And I think he's even come out and said that he was obviously like Thierry Henry is probably like a lot of young French footballers' idol, and he just looks like he might have a similar. He'll probably go on to be more successful in terms of titles and everything than Thierry Henry because like he's already won so much at a younger age than him as well because he's only 22 or 23 right now. So, but in terms of like career trajectory, I think he'll end up winning more than Thierry, but I think he'll have a similar run like Thierry because he relies so much on his speed, and he will begin to drop off, I think, into his like early 30s, I think, like 31, 32.
So you see the same sort of thing in terms of that drop off because of the speed going that Thierry Henry had later in his career as well.
Yeah, because I don't see him necessarily as he's definitely like he definitely has some football intelligence, but I don't see him on the same level as like a Rooney or even a Harry Kane right now, because Harry Kane seems to be dropping a little bit deeper and deeper as he's aging. Rooney dropped into the midfield like once he reached his 30s. Messi is now sort of like even a couple of years ago he started dropping more and more into the midfield. I don't necessarily see him, picking up the ball in the midfield and delivering those defense splitting balls or the cross-field passes. I don't see him doing that. So if anything, instead of playing out in the wing, he'll play through the middle. But even then, I'm not sure that I see him as a type of hold-up striker like a Lewandowski either. I don't think he can play that style. So I think he will drop off more rapidly. So it'll be very similar to Henry, in my opinion.
And so Henry's obviously a good comparison, and I agree with it in terms of a lot of the style of play. But the good thing for Mbappe is that he has 20 or so years more of being able to examine what other players have done to remain relevant and keep and have that longevity in their career. So when you say going through the middle, the first thing I thought of was Cristiano. Obviously started as a winger, obviously very reliant on physical gifts, but very skilled, and I think a lot like Mbappe. And Mbappe now has the advantage of he's seen this guy and how he evolved his game, so he could do similar things to that when the physicality is less reliable. And another thing I wanted to touch on was so you're of the belief that Mbappe will definitely claim more honours than Thierry Henry?
Well, Thierry won one World Cup. Mbappe's already won a World Cup.
Yep. So they're even on that. Henry has a Euros on him.
From a certain perspective, you can say that France was favourite to win the Euros in 2016. even last year they were
Yeah.
the favourites. Like maybe they would have won it if it was held in 2020 rather than 2021. But obviously we had the pandemic and
Mm,
everything. But even so, like they went out to Switzerland. They sort of had that mental
yeah.
capitulation. So he's had two chances to win
And
the
he's still
Euros, and he's fallen
yeah,
short on
He
both.
needs the Euros
Yeah,
and another World Cup will take him above that international Hall of Honorary, and he also needs a Champions League
yeah, but he
because Honorary
was
won that Champions League once.
yeah, but he was born in '98, so he's going to be 24 in December.
He's got a lot of time.
Yeah, so he's got like what he's going to be 24 for this World Cup. He's going to be 28 for the next
Mm,
one, and then he's going to be 32. So he's already played at one World Cup, so he's going to play if he stays fit, healthy, even if he drops off a little bit of form, but so long as he stays healthy and relevant, like he'll play in 4 World Cups all around, and 3 or 4 more Euros as well. So he definitely, and considering how stacked like
yeah.
France is at the moment, and then like they always have talent coming through, always. He's like France is always going to remain up there with the top 3 or 4 teams as favourites to win. So he most likely will. Like I'd definitely put my money on him to win another international trophy, whether it's a World Cup or a Euro.
And you just as soon as you went into that point about how young he is, how many more World Cups he can play in, and the fact that the French team, for me, should be going into at least this World Cup as favourites. We don't know how 2026 will look. Obviously, it's too far in the future, but at least this next World Cup, I almost need to whisper it, but there's a chance that his career could stack up against the likes of a Pele career. If he can
Yep.
have a dynasty, if he can win multiple, 2 or 3 World Cups, then you're looking at the greatest player who maybe ever played.
Yeah.
And if this French team remains one of the strongest in the world, and he keeps going on this path of progression that he's on, I don't want to. I don't obviously don't want to put him there yet, but there's a chance, given how young he is.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. Like, and if he and you sort of touched on like the Ronaldo comparison, where like but you didn't mention also one other factor, like not just that he can watch footage of all these players and how they've changed the way they play, but also the sports science as well. Like you have players now, instead of retiring at 32, 34, they're playing, like you have strikers and midfielders now playing till 36, 37, 38. Like,
It's just, and
so
I'll
the
add to that.
yeah,
You have athletes just going on for longer into their careers. I
yeah,
mean, you look at the American sports, LeBron James and Tom Brady playing to ridiculous standards at so late in career, and then you've got Cristiano Ronaldo in football. I mean, it just that point is so valid for all sports.
yeah, because when you hear like how players used to like they like back in the 70s, like I think there's footage of like Cruyff like smoking before training and stuff like that, and
Yeah,
like
smoking.
other players like Bobby Charlton and all those players, like they'd like, and then after a game like they would go down to the pub and like get absolutely hammered, and they didn't look after themselves in a physical from that physical aspect. Whereas like you have someone like Ronaldo, like you hear the stories about him, like after a game, he goes home and then like he does like 3 or 4 hours of recovery, like he gets massages, he does like all this stuff so that the next day like he's fresh and he can pretty much play a whole another 90 minutes. So you have players that are now investing in their health, and they can play almost every day, considering like how much, if they want to take their recovery as seriously as what they do now, like compared to like what they used to do. Like they didn't even take recovery seriously at all. Like their recovery was drinking like what 10 or 15 pints. Like even back in the late 90s, like you hear like Gary Neville and Roy Keane talking about it as well. Like they'd go out to the pub and stuff. It was only really Wenger that brought in the whole nutrition and sports science into the Premier League, and that was late 90s, early 2000s that was starting to be looked at more seriously, and that's only 20 years ago, really. So it's all relatively new from that perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that lends itself to the old cliche that the sky is the limit for this guy, for Mbappe. He's so young. He's got all these advantages of playing in the era he does. And he could really go on for a long time, still being a beast, and then he could evolve his game eventually. So
yeah, and
really, any of those careers could be possible for him, except for the ones that we mentioned, like Maradona and Rossi.
Yeah, and if I can just bring in an example from another sport, like I think I read something about Kobe Bryant. I think into the later parts of his career, he would travel like regularly to Germany because they'd do this. I think it was like some kind of red blood cell treatment where where they'd extract your red blood cells, run it through like some sort of circulator or something like that, like to sort of. And then they'd re-inject it back into you, which would help with recovery. So there's all this new tech to help prolong careers and help you keep at 100% till these later stages. Like Ronaldo's going to be 37 this year, and he's dropped off a little, but is he dropped off because United's really poor, or is he dropped off because he's 37? That's the question. But he's still going strong at 37.
And using your bringing another sport into it, Ronaldo really looks like he's a parallel image of LeBron James, doesn't he? Playing for an ineffective side, but still scoring so many goals. I think he's third or fourth in the Premier League top scorers this season at such a late age. Those advancements in technology and the way the players can look after their body has really led itself to these kind of performances from players at a later age. So.
Yeah.
Mbappe does so long to play.
And you know who else? Ibrahimovic is still playing, and he's 41.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
He's 41. Like goalkeepers used to play into their 40s, and now you have.
I know.
Now you have someone like Ibra playing it till he's 40. Like I have no doubt that Ronaldo will most likely play till he's 40.
So, I think he wants to get to 1,000 goals, doesn't he?
He won't do it at United. Maybe if he moved to City, he would have.
Yeah, I know. And I think this Mbappe talk from obviously from his breakout performances 2018 World Cup, but it leads itself. He's a good gateway for us to now look at the upcoming World Cup, which is now just over 7 months away, which is crazy, really, to think about. But we're so close to a World Cup, and it gives us a really good opportunity to look at that tournament as a whole. All right, so enough of me rambling on about the history of the World Cup and great individual breakout performances. Let's look ahead at the upcoming World Cup, just over 7 months' time. And from one PSG forward to another, Nevin, is this World Cup make or break for Neymar?
You can say that it's make or break for a lot of players. Like Messi hasn't won it, Ronaldo hasn't won it, and Neymar is that. I guess he was touted as being that successor to like Messi and Ronaldo, and he looked like he was gonna become that when he was still at Barca. And even like that 2014 World Cup, I think he got injured before the semi, didn't he? It looked like he was on that trajectory, and ever since.
Yeah, remember they were holding up his shirt in the national anthems before, like he was dead.
Yeah. Well, in retrospect or in hindsight, you could probably say his career was dead from that point. Even though he did go on to win the.
Oh, come on! He won a Champions League.
I know he went on to win the Champions League, but then one more or two more seasons after that, he moved to PSG, and he's achieved nothing.
Yeah.
And with all due
And
respect,
that's it. Yeah.
except for becoming a really good Twitch streamer, apparently.
And just before you go on, that right there is that move to PSG is why I say make or break, because the other ones you mentioned, Ronaldo and Messi, we're not going to think any less of them if they don't win a World Cup. If they do win a World Cup, obviously they go, well, now either of them who wins a World Cup really can claim to be the GOAT, who are the best who ever played. But with a player like Neymar, who is one of the very few band of players to have won a Libertadores and a Champions League, and he's obviously did that at such a young age. But now it's been what, 5 seasons since he did anything of note. Probably the last thing he did of note was that fantastic performance against PSG, ironically, for Barcelona in the 6-1, I believe it was, that comeback.
Yep.
That we talked about last pod, actually, but that's probably the last performance of real note that he's had. So that's why I asked the question, make or break for him.
I think he's from one perspective, he's cemented his spot as an elite player, but I'm not sure that he will go down as an all-time great, depending on his performance for Brazil at this World Cup. If it's similar to his 2014 performances, because I think he did, to a certain perspective, he did carry that Brazil team, even though like the Brazil team was stacked, he did sort of carry it in an attacking perspective.
From the offensive sense,
from the offensive sense. So if he puts in a similar performance and he gets them to the finals, like the actual final, even if he wins or loses, I think it will definitely, I guess it will sort of prop up his career from that perspective. But yeah, like depending on his performance, because like that Brazil team has a lot of talent in it. Like you have Vinicius Junior that's going to be in it. He's breaking out. You have Martinelli, who's just got called up for this international break, who is looking like he could be like the next big thing. Like obviously he's 20 years old, so there's players there there's players there that could actually outshine him. To be honest.
You see, so that's a good point on this Brazil team that is stacked. For me, going into this World Cup at this stage, obviously a lot could change in 7 months, but at this stage, probably my second favourite. The ideal final for me would be a France-Brazil final at the end of it all. But for me, Neymar has to be the main man of that team. In the offensive sense, he has to be the guy who's driving everything for that team, and it will be really interesting to see how he performs, because I think it is. I think I agree with your point that he's somewhat cemented his place, but if he wants to be sitting at that table and in that room that we talked about before, for me, he needs to take something out of this World Cup, whether it be to win it is ideal. But even if, and we've seen this in the past, obviously 2014 springs to mind with Messi getting Argentina all the way to the final, not winning it, but he can still claim the golden ball out of that tournament. So if Neymar can do something like that, for me, then it's not as good as winning it, but it gets you into that room with those elite players, even though he hasn't done anything for years, really, since that PSG move. So for me, in that sense, it is make or break for him.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
Yeah, I guess I can agree with that. Like from a, because I think he's also said that he's most likely going to retire from international football after this tournament as well. So you also have that to consider, because isn't he like 30? I think he's 30 this year. So yeah, this could potentially be his last tournament as well if he hangs up the boots for Brazil after this.
Could be. He'd want to go out on top as well.
Yeah.
No doubt he's got the talent, but it'll be interesting to see. Another team who I think I put into this sort of make or break, I'd say more last chance. I believe, and it'll be interesting to see if you agree with me here, but I believe that this is the last chance for Belgium to go on and win a tournament. And I borderline felt that way with the last Euros, but I think they still have enough quality in the squad that if a few things break their way, maybe the Brazil or France get knocked out before they have to play them. They get an easier passage into the final, and then it's football. One game, we've seen it with Italy, North Macedonia, and in a one-game situation, anything can happen. So,
Yeah.
but for me, this is the last chance for Belgium to win a major international tournament with this group.
I'm gonna agree with you there, and because I was actually thinking about them before we came on, and I was like, this team, like the majority of this team, like the generation, is already 30 or 30 plus. So this is, for a lot of these players, it's their last tournament, most likely, or at least their last tournament that I guess you can still like say that they're still in their prime. So like at the next tournament, they will all be like 35, 36 if they're still playing for Belgium. They don't have that next generation of talent necessarily coming through from what I can see. And from one perspective, I guess I can relate this to Croatia. Like Croatia had at the last World Cup, they had an aging squad, and they've had to rebuild over the last 4 years. Like so, and you had a lot of players leaving, and now there's like a lot of new faces. There's still like a handful of players that did play at the last World Cup, or like in the starting 11 or the starting like 13, 14, that would come on as subs. But all round, it's almost like a completely new team, and Belgium's gonna have to go through the same rebuilding phase. So, like you said, this, and I agree with that. I think this is this generation's last chance to win the World Cup.
If we're gonna, if we look at Belgium, obviously still, I believe they still have Martinez in charge. Good manager, has that club experience. I've been impressed when I've seen him in major tournaments in recent times. Obviously, the amount of talent they have, it's a golden generation for them. I personally believe that they've probably missed their window. I think the last two major tournaments were really where the World Cup in 2018 and the Euros in 2020. I think they were the big chances for this Belgium team to win their major tournament. And if we shift the focus to a individual perspective, probably not in the maybe having more to ride on it in terms of legacy and how we'll look back on a player. But Kevin De Bruyne, if he was able to do something in this tournament, be it golden ball or be it actually win the thing, would put himself right up there in the all-time greats, because for me, he's one of the best midfielders I've ever seen play. But when you look at the international honours, be it club or national team, he doesn't have any. So it's not necessary. It's make or break in that sense for him as well.
You know what? I'm just going to throw this out there. This thought crossed my mind. Belgium is the PSG of international football. And the reason I say this is because I've seen them falter too many times when they were favourites or second favourites to win a tournament. So I think did they make the semi-finals of the 2016 Euros? And then 2018 they made the semi-finals. They went out to France, albeit they probably should have won that game. France played extremely defensive, and then they went out to Italy at the last year at the Euros, and then but even like now in the UEFA Nations League, they were 2-0 up against France and they threw it away. Like France came back in the second half and scored 3 goals. I think it was. So they've been in positions to win or go further, and they've faltered. Did they go up first against Italy as well? Were they 1-0 up against them, or did Italy score first? I can't remember off the top of my head. But
me neither. I don't.
Yeah, I can't remember whether they scored first or whether they equalized. But like that was a game that I guess from one perspective that they could have won, because from memory it was a very even game as well. But yeah, like
it's interesting you say those things about Belgium, because, and I'm applying it to the individual again. Well, Kevin De Bruyne plays for Man City. Man City do exactly the same thing in the Champions League, you could say. And the fact that team hasn't won a Champions League yet is staggering, really.
Yeah, I can. I
can. And I'm not suggesting that I'm blaming him for that. I'm just saying it's an interesting parallel to draw.
Yeah, and I guess like I think in the last Euros, he was coming back from that injury that he suffered in the Champions League final. So like he had that face injury, and then I think he also did his ankle in one of the games leading up to that quarterfinal against Italy. So like he wasn't necessarily 100% fit, and I don't think he's ever. I think only at the World Cup he was like 100% fit to carry them through. But yeah, that team just seems more like a team of individuals rather than like a group of players playing collectively. That's my perspective. And then like you can also throw in Eden Hazard. Like he's a shadow of the player that he was at Chelsea. Like I think I saw a statistic. He's been I can't remember exactly what it said. But it's like he's been either injured for 32 times, or he's been injured for like 32 months since joining Real Madrid. Something along those lines with that statistic. So Eden Hazard hasn't played. He's played like I think like 5 full games or something like that as well. So he hasn't played at all over the past like 3 seasons, at all. And he was their best player.
I can't remember the last time I had an Eden Hazard thought, to be quite honest. And this guy was one of the premier footballers in the world.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time he played a full 90 minutes, to be honest. Like I've seen him come on for Real in like the last 10-15 minutes in some games. But yeah, I can't remember the last time he started for Real and played a full 90.
It's gotten to the point with him, I'd actually be shocked if he was in the squad. Maybe not shocked, but I would raise my hand.
I think he's the captain of the team. I think he's the captain, so he might.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Now I'll just check if he'll need to called up to this international break. I'll see if he's been called up.
Yeah, he'll go on though. He'll need to put in some sort of Bale-like performances if he's in the team going in, because and it's funny, they play for the same club. Yeah. So they've got two parasites, if you want to call them that, on the team.
I wouldn't necessarily call I've also got Hazard a parasite, though. I'd just say he's been extremely unfortunate.
That was a reference to, obviously, the Bale article. Yeah. But, I mean, it's kind of disgraceful with Hazard, the way he comes into seasons. It's clearly at least 5 kgs overweight. It's very clear with him.
Yeah.
But I've also got a theory on that Belgium team. If you played that semi-final against France, and Belgium were wearing the French uniforms and known as France, and that team was exactly the same, and the way they played was exactly the same, but you just changed the uniforms and the names of the team, and most importantly, the history of those two nations, then I think Belgium would get through that. Because it's a funny phenomenon, but when your nation doesn't have success at this in this tournament at this level, then somehow that infiltrates the current group. I don't know if it infiltrates, but it just never seems to work out that you see a Belgium win the World Cup or a Croatia win the World Cup, because they don't have that history of winning World Cups. I mean, it's got to happen at some point, and obviously it happened for France in '98. But I just think that first one for nations like that is so hard to overcome.
Yeah, and I guess for these smaller, like Belgium's a small country as well. Like, they don't necessarily have a conveyor belt of talent. Like, I think the population of France is like 60 million, and then population. Belgium is 11 million, so it's like France is 6 times bigger. So they have 6 times as much talent coming through their system, and like you said, they're an established footballing nation. Like they're up there with like the Brazils, the Argentinas in terms of history. Spain as well, Italy. Like they're there with the elite nations.
Yeah.
Belgium, yeah, they haven't necessarily established themselves or cemented their place. Like they have an extremely good generation that has come through. Same with Croatia in '98. That was an extremely good generation. And now, like 20 years later, in the 2018 World Cup, we had another generation that came through and got to the final hurdle. And that's something like that you touched on, like winning that first international trophy. It's just that massive weight off their shoulders, and I think you can even say it for Spain. Like Spain didn't win anything since was it the 60s?
I believe.
Yeah, it was
Euros.
the 60s, and they only won the Euros, and then they won the Euros, they won the World Cup, and then they won the Euros again.
That's a great point, because they did it in that order.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to say for nations like Belgium, Croatia, and then obviously Spain at that point. I think that winning the Euros is far more achievable than winning the World Cup, because you see in the history of the Euros, you've seen Czechoslovakia have been able to win it in the past, and Greece have been able to, and Denmark have been able. So the Euros can throw up those surprises. And obviously it wouldn't have been a surprise with this Belgium team, but like for the Belgium nation to win a major tournament like that. So that's why 16 and 20 in the Euros were, for me, so important for them, because then you've got that chance of doing what Spain did and rolling over the confidence from a Euros tournament into it.
And you cut out there.
Oh, sorry. I was just talking about how if they were able to win a Euros in 16 or 20, they would have been able to maybe roll on that momentum from the Euros tournament into the World Cup.
Yeah. No, like I think that mental hurdle is a big factor. 100% there.
It's almost the mental hurdle of a whole nation as well. The whole history and the whole nation of football. Yeah, and so we've been talking a lot about breakouts for individuals in the history of the World Cup. So now this breakout I want to apply to a whole team, and that is Spain. How are we feeling about Spain going into this World Cup?
Runners up in the Nations League just last year, so and I think that was like 6 months ago or 5 months ago that they played against France. And then in the Euros, was it the semi-final that they got to the Euros as well? With a relatively young squad, like Luis Enrique has a very young squad on his hands as well.
And he's a good manager.
Yeah, the only concern that I have with Spain, and I guess this concern sort of spans, and I've spoken to you about this before. Spain don't necessarily have like that that classic number 9, like they had a couple of years ago with Torres and Villa, where you could give them the ball, and if they were in the box, you'd be like, okay, there's like a 90% chance they're going to score this. Like they weren't, they were very clinical, and I don't see who that player can be for them. And maybe that's because the modern game has evolved, where number 9s are starting to die out. Like there's only like a handful of that sort of classical clinical number 9 where you give the ball to them in or around the box, and you're like, this is dangerous. Like Haaland comes to mind. Lewandowski's obviously there. I'm not going to throw Lukaku in that, because I think Lukaku is extremely wasteful with the amount of chances that he gets. Kane I'd put in there. So there's only like a handful of players, like strikers, like classical strikers, that I'd really say. Benzema, I think I'd put up there as well. But yeah, like Spain, watching them at the Euros and some of the Nations League games, I think they're lacking that striker that can score them, 5, 6, 7 goals in a tournament. That's and I'm not sure where the goals will necessarily come from with them. But in terms of their overall team, I think they're going to control games. They're going to dictate the tempo, and it might be similar to that 2010 run where they're just winning most games like 1-0. And like 1 or 2-0, and that's that. But I think they could go for a very deep run into the next World Cup.
And I'm glad you brought up the 2010 run, because I think you touched on some really important points. And the first one, obviously, is that the striker point, because I do see these teams playing quite similarly in the way that they're made up in terms of the profile of their players on the squad are very technical, death by 1,000 cuts. Mm-hmm. It's ironically the kind of football that Spain play in that 2010 World Cup and somewhat now. It's actually almost a defensive style, but they defend by keeping the ball.
Yeah.
So if the opposition never have the ball, they can't score.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that 2010 Spain World Cup winning team actually had a really tremendous defensive record, but like you say, they didn't blow teams away in that. But what they did have were the options of Villa and Torres up front, and they're two fantastic strikers. I mean, in Villa's case, he's won everything there is into the game, and his scoring record was fantastic. And around that time, for years before going into that tournament, Torres was either the best or one of the best strikers in the world. So they had those fantastic options up front. This team, you're 100% right. I don't see the options they have. But for me, the concern is actually at the back. I don't trust their goalkeeper. I've seen him play. It's quite eccentric. Eric Garcia plays at centre back, and I've already gone on the pod and gone on the record with my thoughts of Eric Garcia. And then the guy next to him sort of rotates. It doesn't seem too set on who plays next to him. So I don't trust that defensive core, not for this World Cup anyway. It'll be interesting to see how those players develop at the back, and if they can get at least 2 of those 3 key positions in terms of goalkeeper and centre backs, if they can get really reliable players there. Because even without a striker, we've seen it with Man City, the death by 1,000 cuts method can work. So if you can play well enough and play that technical game and keep the ball, and you can dominate games, and it might be enough to see you through a tournament. I just don't trust the core group at the back who need to back up all those technical players in midfield and in the front areas.
I think you have a point there. Like they definitely, like, you look at the back 4 in the World Cup, like it was Piqué, Ramos, Puyol. Puyol was injured for the Euros. No, yeah. So he did win the World Cup, didn't he? And then
Puyol. I remember he scored that header against Germany in the semi.
Wait, who was the left back? Because Jordi Alba came later.
I think I know the left back for the '08 Euros was Capdevila. I don't know if he was still there at 2010 for the World Cup. I can't, but yeah.
But yeah, that was an extremely solid back four because Ramos was playing right back, wasn't he?
And Iker Casillas behind him, obviously, as well.
Yeah. So, but you know who I'll give a shit.
And Busquets and Xabi Alonso in front of them as well. Sorry, I just had to throw that in.
Yeah, and then Xavi just in front of them or alongside them. So
yeah.
And then so that was an extremely stacked team. But I want to give a shout to David De Gea, but I'm not sure Luis Enrique necessarily likes him. Because I'm not sure how.
It's crazy.
But he's a very good shot stopper, and this season he's saved United so many times. But I don't think Enrique is confident in his technical ability on the ball, and that's why he doesn't play him. Because I don't think his passing range is as good as who he uses at the moment. That's why he's
and I want to take, and if I could take that De Gea that negative against De Gea, if I could take it one step further, it's his distribution, but it's also his starting position. Because I watch Man United games, and when I watch them, there'll be balls in behind where you'd see an Edison or an Allison come up and sweep them up, and the ball would be gone into the row, and the striker wouldn't get in behind. But De Gea is so reluctant to come off his line at all times that any ball in behind either means that the striker could come onto it, or the forward or the winger or whoever it is could come onto it, or the defenders have to track all the way back and be turned around. So I think a lot of managers take issue with that, his starting position and his reluctance to sweep. But I'm definitely not going to criticize De Gea for that, because I believe you play to your best player's strengths, and he's an unbelievable shot stopper. He's up there in the discussion for the best goalkeeper in the Premier League for this season, and he's the only Man United player that you can say has a shout of being talked about in Team of the Year or anything like that. So that's a good shout for De Gea for sure.
Yeah. I think they could have overall they could have a good run though. I think they should have a good run. They should be up there with the favourites.
Yeah. I think mentioning them fourth in this list and what we're talking about is pretty fair. But I do think it's a tournament too soon for them. I think they're a bit too young, and there's still, as we've just talked about, a few issues that they need to address. So the Euros 2 years later and the next World Cup, as long as these players continue on the trajectory that they're on, should be realistic targets for this Spain team. But obviously a good run in this World Cup will set them up for that. And then I guess it's time for us to trot out everyone's favourite saying, or a version of it, but is this the year where it comes home?
You know what? Look, just looking at the lineups on paper, I think I'd put England as the favourites to win the World Cup, ahead of France and Spain.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of their players this season are playing extremely well in the Premier League, and so long as they can, and I think also because it's falling in. Instead of falling at the end of the season, it's going to be falling in the middle of the season. I think a lot of the players will be hitting form.
Yeah. And it's before that crazy Christmas schedule.
Exactly.
So I believe I was reading that the players would actually come back for Boxing Day fixtures after the World Cup.
Yeah.
So the players don't have to. The players who are playing in the Premier League, which is pretty much every English player, doesn't have to deal with that crazy Christmas schedule and then the run in after that into the World Cup. They get to play the World Cup before they have to deal with all that. So that's a great shout.
Yeah, exactly. And just looking at the team, for instance, Ramsdale right now, I think he's going to be the number one, and
I hope so.
he is looking tremendous for Arsenal, and he's a key component to their run at the moment. I'd say he's one, like if you think about like the old notion, like if you want to win, like defenses win championships. I know they're not going to win the Premier League, but like if all teams are built from the back or to the front line, and they like he's commanding. He's an excellent shot stopper. He's excellent with his feet, excellent with his distribution. And so long as he keeps on this trajectory, he'll cement that number one spot ahead of Pickford, and he will just instill a lot more confidence in that back line. Because Pickford, every time I've seen him, he does look shaky. He's had his shaky moments. I can't remember Ramsdale having a shaky moment when a ball's come like to his feet or been shot at like directly at him. I know that he got done by Jota at the near post in his last game, but up until then I can't remember him putting a foot wrong. So like
that's honestly the only shaky performance I've seen him have really in my time of watching him this season. For us, all that performance against Liverpool was not quite as commanding as I'm used to seeing from him this season. So.
Yeah.
But he should be number one.
Yeah, and then England is absolutely stacked in some positions, like right back position. Like who's going to play? Reece James, Trent Alexander-Arnold, or Kyle Walker? Like the only left back, I'm not sure who would be there. Like Luke Shaw played there, but has he been injured for most of the season? I'm
not sure. Obviously,
Chilwell's
a big loss for them.
Yeah, so
but he might be back by then.
Yeah, Chilwell, like he's a good shout as well. I think I was listening to something like Chilwell and Reece James are back. Should be back in the next like 2 or 3 weeks for Chelsea. So Chilwell, he'll probably be the left back. In the back line, you have Ben White who's breaking out, and I think on current form he should be ahead of Maguire. Who's the other centre back that would be alongside them?
Well, England have a tendency to play three at the back, so you could look at Kyle Walker playing as one of the three centre backs as well, and then you could play another right back because, like you said, you're so stacked in that position. Then you can put a Trent as a wing back, or Reece James as a wing back.
Yeah. So, and then like their midfield is obviously stacked as well. Like Henderson didn't even play the Euros really, just because how stacked they were. Like you had Declan Rice and Calvin Phillips in there. So like and then their forward line as well is like insane. Like across the whole front three. So I'm personally going to put them down as favourites, and they've had like they had the World Cup, they had the Euro. This is their third tournament together as pretty much that same core group of players with a couple of new additions. So that's why I'm putting them ahead of a team like France, because I think some of their players are aging as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned it so often with how stacked this England team is. So if you were to put them as favourites, a good thing about that is that injuries or anything like that, or even suspensions in the tournament, really could have less of an effect on this squad as maybe some of the other squads of some of the other favourites. But the key for me really is, and we're seeing it in probably the last month, maybe 6 weeks. Harry Kane has to be the key. If he's not playing at the level he's been playing at the last 6 weeks, then I don't give England much of a shout, because I think they fall into that sort of. They're probably a little bit better all round, but they might fall into that Spain sort of. We might have the same criticisms of them as we would a Spain team, because without that number 9, I know they've got a couple waiting in the wings underneath, but I don't see the guys who are underneath Harry Kane as World Cup winning strikers. it has to be Harry Kane, and he has to have at least as good a tournament as he did in 2018, where England really had a good chance of getting to that final and had a good chance. So I don't disagree with your shouts. Well, I guess I do disagree with your shout as them being favourites, but I'm not going to argue it too strongly because I wouldn't put France and I wouldn't put Brazil that much higher than them. You make all those good points about how stacked they are, but for me, the key has to be Harry Kane.
Yeah, and if you look at some of the other players coming through, like for instance Saka, like he's had an excellent season for Arsenal, and Southgate seems to trust him a little bit more. He's going to be a year older now as well. Emil Smith-Rowe is breaking through. Sterling's a weird one for me, but yeah, like I said, I reckon they have a lot of options and they're going to be stacked. And look, Sancho as well, he's starting to pick up some form under Rangnick. Whether that will continue under new management into next season, but like Sancho's there as well. Grealish is now playing under Guardiola, which it's only going to make him a more intelligent player.
Foden
as well. Like, yeah, it's almost like they have two players for every position, to be honest, and that's why I'm putting them as my favourites.
Yeah, and that's, like I've said, that's a fair shout. And I think as well, you touched on it, the age of a lot of those players in that squad is quite young. So the good thing for England is they don't fall into that Belgium category for me. And they should still have a window going into the next Euros and the next World Cup after this part.
Yeah.
But there's also as well, because I've said Harry Kane is the key, this is probably Harry Kane's World Cup at the level that he's at. So this could be their best chance out of all those windows as well.
Yeah. Like, especially when I look at the other teams, like Germany, like for instance, like for the teams that are qualified only, the teams that are qualified. So Germany, look, they overcame them like last year, like 9 months ago. They beat them quite comfortably. I'm not sure where Germany is at, but I think Hansi Flick is now in charge of them, whereas Joachim Low, that was Joachim Low's last tournament, so they've got a new manager in there. But I think they have a very similar problem with Spain, where they don't have that out-and-out number 9 that can score them, 6 or 7 goals in the tournament. I think they're going to play a very similar style to Spain. Netherlands have a very from what I've seen of their squad, they have like a very inexperienced midfield and forward line. But they obviously have Van Dijk in the back line. So they don't look scary to me. Argentina just came off of winning the what's their one called? The name's escaping me.
The Copa.
Yeah, the Copa America. Like they just came off winning that, but again, they don't necessarily look scary to me. But they do look pretty. This is probably the most united that I've seen the team in quite a while.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. They're actually playing a system, and they look like they're playing as a team.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting. But they don't have the quality that they've had going into recent tournaments.
Yes, but they do look more like a team, and they don't look as reliant on Messi as they were in previous tournaments. I'm not sure if you want me to continue going through the rest of the teams or not.
Well, you've named three of the sleepers that I wanted to say. Germany, Argentina, and Netherlands. Obviously, you've talked about Netherlands as well. I think fall into that sort of Argentina mold as well, where obviously, and it's been for a few years now, but they've lost Van Persie, they've lost Robin, so those key attacking players, but they've got Van Gaal back in charge, so that means 5-3-2. They're solid at the back. I mean, Van Dijk, De Ligt back there as well. So they're probably a good shout for a sleeper as well. but I don't think their balance is quite right. And like you said, they don't scare me with the players in the attacking areas. Germany, I think Germany are like the poor man's version of Spain for me. They probably want to play the same way, but their players aren't as good for me as the Spanish players. So that's why I put Spain above Germany for me. And they've been pretty disappointing in recent years, pretty much since that 2014 World Cup win. And there was another sleeper from South America, Uruguay. I think Uruguay have a good balance of squad. They always have that work ethic. It's sort of built into Uruguayans. So they're going to have that identity going into that World Cup. So they might be a good shout for a sleeper. And I guess we sort of touched on it out of the teams who have already qualified, but Switzerland could also go far in this tournament, I think. But they're not a shout to win it, I don't think.
Yeah.
Well, I'll ask you this: out of all those sleepers that we've mentioned, and maybe you want to touch on a few more, but who would you take to go furthest in the tournament?
Just with Uruguay, I want to give a shout out. Like, this is going to be Cavani and Suarez's last chance, I guess. As well.
Definitely.
So you could see that sort of depending on how inspired they're feeling, you could see that sort of Zidane-esque 2006 performance where they just put the team on their back and carry them through. You could see that, but I'm not sure you necessarily will because at the end of the day, they're strikers.
I think only one of them will be starting as well because I think they'll bring in Nunez. I saw him play the recent qualifiers, and he's obviously having a good season for Benfica. So I think they'll be keen to play him as one of the two at least, and then play him next to one of the old guys.
Yeah. But out of the teams that were mentioned, and I guess the ones
obviously I didn't mention your Croatia either. So
I don't think. No, I don't think we'll.
Yeah, I think they're coming down for window.
I think we'll get. I'm not sure if they've done the group draw yet for the teams that are qualified, but I think we should get out of the group. But I see us faltering at the round of 16 or potentially quarterfinals, depending on who we get in the 16. I just don't.
Yeah, obviously.
Like, we have a lot of good young players, but we haven't had a proper striker for 20 years, to be honest. Like one we can just rely on to bang in goals every time we pass it to him. So yeah, I don't. But like I said, we have a lot of young talent. Like, I think we're stacked in left back and right back at the moment. And even our midfield is pretty scary. Like, Modric is still like in his prime, which is very surprising. Kovacic, if he can stay fit, like he's looked extremely dangerous for Chelsea every time he's played. But yeah, like, we just don't have.
Brozovic is always pretty solid.
Oh yeah, he's like a. I guess he reminds me a little bit of Busquets. Like a Croatian Busquets, like that sort of type of player where you give the ball to him and
just a little bit more energy, but
yeah. But yeah, we just don't.
Rakitic retired, didn't he?
Yeah, he retired, which is strange for me because I think he's like 2 years younger than Modric, and he called it quits, which is unfortunate.
And whenever he plays for Sevilla, he's played pretty well this season. So.
Yeah. But yeah, we're just lacking that forward threat at the moment. Which, yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. Like, we're stacked in defense and midfield, but we just don't have anything up front, to be honest. But out of the other teams, like, I think Switzerland could be a good shout to make the quarterfinals. Maybe even like, just that dark horse. Maybe even the semis if they get a really good run. Like, for instance, in the last World Cup, Croatia played. They played their first hard team in the semis, which was England, and even England.
Yeah.
They got? Was it Ecuador that they got, or Colombia, and then
Colombia.
Who else did they get? Sweden,
and then I think
something. Who did they get?
Yeah,
But
they got a good run. But
but
that
they
side of the draw was
yeah
set up for a good run for Croatia and England.
yeah. So they both teams had their first test in the semi-finals. So if Switzerland get a sort of favorable draw like that, I reckon they could be a good shout for the semis. To be honest, but
Yeah, and you know who always comes to mind when we talk about favourable runs? That '06 Italy team.
yeah,
They played Australia in the round of 16, then they played Ukraine in the quarterfinals, and then they got Germany, who had home advantage, but they weren't a great German team. So,
yeah.
and I always lament that one because if Australia had held on against that 10 man of Italy and Lucas Neal doesn't give away that penalty, I think Australia would at least be semi-finalists of the World Cup because Ukraine were awful. I have no idea how they got to the quarterfinals of the World Cup.
Oh well, you get a
I think
favorable
that was the one
draw,
where
and
Switzerland went out without conceding a goal.
yeah. Well, it's just the like if you get a favorable draw, then that's just the way it's
Exactly.
handed for
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
I think if I picked out of all of those sleepers, if I picked, I'll pick one from Europe and one from South America. I pick probably the Dutch. I think they got a good chance if things line up for them to go deep in the tournament. But again, things need to line up because those teams that we went more in depth at before, I still see them above them. And Uruguay, I think Uruguay from South America, I think they're always dangerous at World Cups. It's something about we talked about history, but they have a rich history in this tournament. I know it was ages ago, but for a nation of their size, they're always such a threat in this competition. So they're probably my two dark horses. I agree with what we said about Argentina before. Switzerland are a good shout. Germany, I'm not sure about really, and I haven't really seen any of the other names who have qualified that don't really stand out as teams who can go far.
Yeah. But even
So yeah,
Brazil, they don't exactly instill fear like they used to. So they're flying under the radar, in my opinion at least. So like whereas like you look at the great Brazil teams from even 10, 15 years ago, like they just seemed stacked, and they would enter any tournament as favorites. I don't think they're entering as favorites, or even as like the top three favorites, to be honest. Like I think I'd put Spain
I've got
ahead
them
of
as
them.
my second.
Mm,
Yeah, I got Brazil as my second favorite to be honest.
if I'm gonna put England as my favourites, followed by France, and then I think I'm gonna personally put Spain ahead of Brazil. Um,
Interesting.
so that like
Well,
Brazil are probably like fourth or fifth for me, to be honest. And I might even put Belgium ahead of
wow,
Brazil, in all honesty.
really, wow.
Yeah, but but
Oh, I just
but
yeah.
I will say that look, I've never been to Brazil, but it's more of a tropic weather, I guess. Like a sort of they're very adapted to the heat, and if that's
Yeah, the
something to
climate.
yeah, if that's something that plays a part, then they might be a little bit more acclimatized than these European teams heading to the Middle East. So it could play in Brazil and Argentina's, even Uruguay's favor with that.
Well, we have 7 months before the tournament, which isn't that long, but is long enough for things to change. So it'll be interesting to see where we're at when we get closer to the tournament. But I just thought for this pod, it was probably a good opportunity with no domestic football to start gearing our attention towards the World Cup because the World Cup, even though as we've talked about, there's all the controversy around this World Cup in terms of how it came to be, obviously, and then the fact that it is going to be November, December. But like we talked about, is at the end of the day, it's a World Cup. It's where great players can make their names and get themselves into that VIP room of all-time greats. So I just thought 7 months out, good opportunity to start focusing a little bit of attention while we don't have it on clubs onto these national sides and onto the World Cup that's coming up. So I'm going to look forward to doing this again closer to the World Cup. Maybe a few weeks into next season when we have an international break and see where we're at then. But for now, I think we're good. Do you have anything to add?
No, not really. I think we've touched on as much as we could touch on. I do think that there's that final stage of qualifiers for Europe today. So who do we have playing today?
I think the only major team we have on the line is Portugal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really, the only other team that we could have spoken about. But
Poland to an extent, because but only because Lewandowski's really in there.
Yeah, I was going to say Poland and Wales, if they both get through, are almost in the same boat for me, where it's you're watching to see what their best player does.
Yeah,
but Poland have a few good players around Lewandowski. I mean, I've been a fan of Piotr Zielinski for a while at Napoli. I think he's a really good player. So they might do a thing or two. They might get out of the group stage if they get there first. But obviously, the big name that we're waiting on is Portugal, and hopefully they get through.
Yeah. So we'll see how they go. I think they're playing at home as well. So
I hope so.
Yeah, Estadio do Dragão. So they're playing. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch then. Fingers crossed North Macedonia don't repeat. With all due respect to the North Macedonians.
Yeah, sorry to any North Macedonians, but we don't want North Macedonia in the World Cup at the expense of Portugal. Maybe in 2026 when we go to a 48-team World Cup, then you can be in it, no worries, but please not this one.
Yeah, especially considering this is going to be Ronaldo's last one as well. So
yeah, exactly.
Don't want to see him missing out.
Yeah, no, I'm with you then. And I think we've hit everything we wanted to hit. Hopefully people liked my 15-minute ramble on the history of the World Cup, and it's got them a little bit more pumped for the World Cup. Maybe not though. But Nev, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for talking all things World Cup with me, and I'll see you again in a couple of days when we have more of a focus on the fixtures coming up in club football. Back more to the bread and butter.
Yeah, definitely. Like something that we're a little bit more excited about at this stage, considering it's just like this weekend rather than months away.
Yeah, it's a bit more tangible.
Yeah. All right, looking forward to it, man.
Thanks, Dev.